Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to recap Act 1 of Romeo and Juliet today. Go over the things that you read, maybe dig into it, some things that you might not have noticed or just, didn't quite understand. I want to make sure you know what's going on. So follow along with me. Hope everyone's doing well. So the play begins with a prologue. I talked about this a little bit in our video last week, but it's a 14-line sonnet, and it acts as fate. It establishes fate in the play. So somebody comes out on stage, they read this prologue out loud, and then the play actually begins. So it talks about the two households, that's the Capulets and the Montagues, who hate each other. It establishes that they've been enemies for generations. It doesn't tell you why. And it basically tells you that the only thing that can end that fighting is the death of the two children, which is Romeo and Juliet. So it really tells you how things are going to end up before it goes through all of it. Act 1, Scene 1 begins with instant chaos. There are these servants that just kind of start fighting for no real reason, and the roles quickly become apparent. So Benvolio tries to establish peace. Benvolio is a Montague, he's Romeo's cousin. Tybalt, on the other hand, instantly tries to keep the fighting going, and that's Juliet's cousin. Tybalt is a Capulet. So you see the contrast between two characters, and in a lot of ways, two families right here from the beginning. And then one of my favorite lines in the play, just because it's ridiculous. Capulet says to his wife to give him his longsword, now, quickly. But in those times, the term for that was hoe. So we are introduced to Capulet by him saying, give me my longsword, hoe. Good times. Good times. Moving on in Scene 1, Prince Aeschylus establishes the consequences for this fighting if it continues. He talks about what a problem this has been for so long, how it's dangerous to the citizens, and then he says that the next person who fights will be put to death. So that kind of is some foreshadowing for you. If people fight again, which of course they will, those people will be put to death. That is their punishment. And then at the end of Scene 1, we see some Montague family dynamics, and I want you to contrast these with the Capulet family dynamics that you'll see throughout the play. So you notice that Montague and his wife, Lady Montague, care deeply about Romeo, and they worry about Romeo, and so does his cousin Benvolio. And Benvolio is very close with Romeo. They're around the same age, so Benvolio tells Montague, hey, you go, let me talk to Romeo, I'll figure out what's wrong with him. And then we see Romeo's dilemma. Romeo is in love with a woman who essentially does not love him back and cannot love him back because she has chosen to live her life a virgin, which in those times likely meant that she had chosen to become a nun. Romeo says this is such a waste. Alright, in Act 1, Scene 2, it's a quite a bit shorter scene. It begins with Paris, who is a relative, by the way, of the prince, but not the prince. Paris talking to Capulet and asking for Juliet's hand in marriage. Capulet initially basically says no, she's too young, she's not even 14 yet. Let 2 more years pass before she's ready to be a bride. But Paris makes an apparently captivating argument by saying, hey, some women have been mothers before that, and they're happy. So Capulet kind of changes his tone and invites Paris to a party, a feast that he's having, and says if you can make Juliet love you, you can marry her. Later, Capulet's servant Peter is out inviting people to the party, but his trouble is he cannot read, and he stumbles upon Romeo and Benvolio and asks them if they can read this list of names so he can invite people. And in so doing, a couple of things are revealed. One, we find out that this girl Rosaline is going to be at the party, and she is the woman that Romeo is in love with at the beginning of the play. Not Juliet, Rosaline. And Romeo is also accidentally invited to the party. It's a Capulet party. Romeo certainly wouldn't be invited normally, being one of the main Montagues, but this servant tells him about it, and so they're just going to wear masks, since it's a masquerade, and kind of crash the party. Scene 3, we see some of the Capulet family dynamics where Lady Capulet is talking to Juliet, her daughter, and it's very cold, it's very businesslike. On the other hand, the nurse is present as well, and she kind of takes on the mother role for Juliet, especially in a more emotional, kind of tender way that Lady Capulet cannot do. So very different family dynamics there. Lady Capulet tells Juliet Paris wants to marry her. Juliet says, I'm not really that interested right now in marriage. And Lady Capulet says, well, just think about it. Maybe you should. And she really kind of pressures her. Scene 4 is a kind of transitional scene. It's very short, but we are also introduced to Mercutio, who is, in my opinion, one of the more interesting characters in the play. For example, he says, give me a case to put my visage in, a visor for a visor. So he says, give me a mask to put my mask in, or to put my face in, a mask for a mask. So he's calling his own face a mask. In other words, we don't really know who Mercutio is. Is he a funny guy, as he sometimes seems? Is he very serious, as he sometimes seems? Is he cynical? He's kind of like an anarchist. He's kind of crazy. So Mercutio is a really interesting character to me, and he changes a lot depending on which scene you're reading. So I love Mercutio. He also gives a long speech in this scene, referred to as the Queen Mab speech, where he essentially just talks about how foolish dreams are and how foolish dreamers are, which is kind of a shot at Romeo, who is a lover and therefore a dreamer. And scene 4 also just continues with this establishing of fate. In fact, Romeo at the end of the scene talks about how he has a bad feeling about going to this party, how he thinks it will lead to his early or untimely death, but he can't control that. It's all up to fate, so he's going to go anyway. And this was kind of a common belief of the time period, that, you didn't have any choice in the matter, you're just controlled by fate. And so they just kind of threw themselves to it. And then scene 5, the scene we all were waiting for, when Romeo and Juliet first meet at the party. So I called this of love and hate, because there's this interesting dynamic here, where on the one hand, Romeo first sees Juliet and instantly forgets about Rosaline. In fact, he says, did my heart love till now? Forswear its sight, for I ne'er saw true beauty till this night. Meaning, he's never loved before, he's never seen anyone beautiful before. Juliet kind of takes the cake. Tybalt, on the other hand, he's full of hate, and he hears Romeo's voice, somehow has the greatest ears ever, and can tell that that voice belongs to a Montague, and he asks for his sword from his servant. He's going to just go fight Romeo right now when Capulet stops him. And Tybalt kind of vows revenge after this. He says that he is bitter about this, that he's going to get his vengeance. So, in the very same scene where true love begins, this seed of hate is also planted. Then you have Romeo and Juliet having their first conversation. It's love at first sight. I love that if you take their conversation and look at it line by line, it's a poem until they stop talking and kiss. So their first conversation is a love sonnet written by Shakespeare. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this: my lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. And then Juliet responds. So they go back and forth with this extended metaphor about Romeo's lips being pilgrims and Juliet's being a shrine, and they need to meet. And it's pretty smooth moves. They end up kissing and falling in love. It's all broken up rather quickly, though. They don't get to talk for very long, because then the nurse starts calling for Juliet, and Romeo has to kind of run off. So it all comes to an end very quickly, and They learn each other's identities. The nurse tells Romeo that the girl he was talking to was Juliet, which is an absolute tragedy to Romeo because he's already in love with her. Nothing he can do now. And then the same happens with Juliet. She asks the nurse who that fellow was. She goes and finds out, comes back and tells Juliet that it was Romeo, and Juliet says in the famous lines, "My only love sprung from my only hate, too early seen unknown and known too late." So they learn each other's identities too late. And they are in love now. There's nothing they can do about it. And so they're just going to have to battle the old families, see how love can conquer all. Oh man, we'll find out how that goes starting tomorrow.